Hey guys, hope this video finds you in good health and good spirits as always. So the next topic that we're going to look at is talking about the Middle East after World War II. Now, this is probably one of the most interesting twists and turns, all sorts of things going on area of study that we're going to look at. But it's also one of the most misunderstood. We hear tons, especially in Western culture, about the Middle East, but there's so much that we don't understand about the Middle East, or we don't understand the circumstances for why things happen in the Middle East the way that they do. So that's really going to be our focus for the next couple of weeks, is that we're really going to try to break down the different events that are happening to different countries and different people in the Middle East. So guys, in order to really understand the Middle East itself, we got to go all the way back to World War One. So we got to drift back into the early 1900s. And if you remember from World War One, we talked about the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire had been in existence for centuries. And we could even go as further back to say with the Ottoman Empire was also kind of a combination of all these different Islamic dynasties that controlled the Middle East really since about the 7th century CE. So we're talking for over 1,000 years, the Middle East had been dominated by really kind of this strong Islamic religious presence. Now, obviously, it's been dictated or it's been run by different dynasties or different governments. But what we look at now is after World War One, we see the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So as a result of the fall of the Ottoman Empire, what we're going to look at is this nationalistic movement that's going to sweep through the Middle East. And what happens with this nationalistic movement, of course, is going to be the emergence of independent countries. So as you guys can see on the slide, there's tons of new independent countries, names that you know of today, that are going to start to emerge as a result of the fall of the Ottoman Empire and a nationalistic movement that starts to sweep through the Middle East during the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. So, guys, a fundamental question that we find in trying to understand and learn the culture in the Middle East is this tug of war between modernization and traditionalism. So, when we think about traditionalism, we think about a dependence upon tradition or the past. And in the Middle East, that tradition is rooted strongly in Islamic teaching. Ever since going back to the days of Muhammad, and then, as I said before, for well over 1,000 years, the religion of Islam is the glue that holds together the Middle East and gives culture and identity and personality to the people living in that region. But during the 20th century, the world is starting to change. And what we find is that after the Ottoman Empire falls apart and we see the emergence of these new independent nations, these new independent nations are going to have the ability to decide what type of government do they want. And as a result of that ability to decide what type of government they want, they can also then decide how big of a role is religion going to play in our day-to-day lives. And that's where we get into this conflict within the Middle Eastern countries between this notion of, are we going to hang on to our strong traditional Islamic roots, or are we going to start to modernize? And are we going to start to bring in more democratic institutions? Are we going to start to bring in more Western things? Are we going to start to westernize a little bit more? And unfortunately, what we recognize is that when you start to modernize and you start to westernize, that's going to start to kind of take away from the traditional Islamic tradition and past. And that's where you're going to start to have a big rift or a problem between the people who don't want to change and don't want to modernize or westernize versus the people that do want to modernize and do want to westernize and start to move away from their traditional Islamic past. The country that best fits as a case study for this movement of traditionalism versus modernization is the country of Turkey. Now, guys, throughout history, Turkey has been a huge location. When you go back all the way to Constantinople, and remember the importance that Constantinople had in trade and the fact that it was on the Silk Road. And then in the year 1453, Constantinople is going to fall to the Turks, and then it's renamed Istanbul. But from that point, Istanbul and Turkey, it was a crossroads of Western Europeans and Africans and people throughout the Middle East and throughout Asia. This was a melting pot of all these different people, which is evidenced by the fact that you have so many different nationalities living in modern day Turkey. But the one problem that you find with this melting pot of all these different cultures is the fact that they are going to have all of their unique cultures and identities and personalities that want to come out, and that we're going to really start to see this challenge between, do we stay traditionally Islamic or do we start to move a little bit more modern and Western? And guys, when I say moving towards modernization and Westernization, it's not to say that people in Turkey rejected Islam. Still to this day, the vast majority of people living in Turkey are practicing Muslim. So it's not as though that they woke up one day and they're like, oh, let's Westernize and reject Islam. That's not what they are doing. But what they are doing is very similar to what the United States does with this notion of separation of church and state. So that people in Turkey can still have their religion and that they could still practice Islam, but they're also going to be able to implement these new modern and these new Western cultural pieces, because Islam is not dictating every single thing that happens in Turkish society. The key name that we have to take away from this push for modernization and Westernization in Turkey is Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. So Ataturk was really the leader in pushing for this more secularized, or splitting from Islamic religion as being the focal point of the government and laws, and starting to adopt more of modernization and Westernization into the country of Turkey. So he would really be what many consider the father of modern day Turkey. Now, remember, not everyone's going to like this. So, not everyone in Turkey is saying, yes, we love Westernization or that we love to modernize and we want to be more Western. But with Ataturk being the leader, he was a general, he showed that he had the ability to lead, he was very popular. And clearly, if the people voted for him and the majority of people were supporting him, that really showed that the people of Turkey were willing to or wanting to transition into this more modern or Western style of culture, while importantly still hanging on to their religion, being fundamentally Islamic and not losing that, but also being able to now incorporate elements of Western culture. So, guys, in wrapping up with Turkey, it's pretty it's you would look at it and just kind of recognize to say that Turkey was really one of the first countries in the Middle East that really pushed for this secularism, this idea of separating church and state, the idea of having a government that becomes a parliamentary system, which is based on democracy, which is a fundamental concept of Western cultures. It starts to push and it adopts more Western style of fashion and just kind of a more Western feel to it than the other Middle Eastern countries that we are going to look at. Now, guys, as you can see on the slide as well, there are going to be times that Kemal is going to face opposition and people are going to challenge him, wanting to go back to a more traditional Islamic state. But those movements against the Westernization and the modernization have all failed. And Turkey remains to be one of those interesting countries in the Middle East that's able to balance both, that it's able to preserve its unique traditional Islamic culture, but also implementing a lot of modernization and Westernization, which allows Turkey to thrive. It's one of the it's a powerful country in the Middle East, and it's a powerful country in the world. All right, so guys, that really wraps up with Turkey. So I know that this video is relatively short, straight to the point compared to some of the other ones, and that's what I was hoping for. So you guys are going to have a CRQ that I'm going to ask that you complete. That's going to be the only assignment that you're going to have for this week. So I know after you guys just put together that PowerPoint presentation on genocide, and you just wrote that essay on Latin America, I did want to give you guys a little bit of a break and try to make your lives just a little bit easier. All right, guys, so get that CRQ done. Hopefully, I see you guys soon. Stay healthy, stay well, stay out of trouble. Do something nice for somebody. Be kind. All the best, guys.